Welcome, everyone. We are starting today with Shrimad Bhagavata Mahapurana, Book 10, Discourse 38, entitled Akrura's Arrival in Vraja. Sri Sukha began again. Having spent that night at Mathura, the city founded by Madhusura, the high-minded Akrura mounted a chariot and drove to Nanda's Vraja. Proceeding along the road, the highly blessed one developed supreme devotion to the lotus-eyed Lord and thought as follows, adopting the following line of reasoning. What noble act has been performed? What supreme austerity has been gone through, or again, what gift has been bestowed on a worthy recipient by me, by virtue of which I am going to behold Sri Krishna? I consider it as difficult for me, whose mind is given to sensuous pleasures, to gain the darshana of Lord Sri Krishna of excellent renown, as a recital of the Vedas is for one born of Shudra parents. I should not think like that. Even to me, a vile creature, the sight or the darshana of Sri Krishna, the immortal Lord, must be vouchsafed. Borne away by the stream of time, one may get to the shore sometime. My evil has been destroyed today. Nay, my birth too has become fruitful, and that I shall bow to the lotus feet of the Almighty Lord, that are fit to be meditated upon by yogis. Ah, Kansa has done me a great favor today. Dispatched by him, I shall behold the lotus feet of Sri Hari, descended in the world of matter, feet by the splendor of whose spherical nails people in the past have got over the darkness of ignorance, so difficult to cross over, feet which are adored by gods, headed by Brahma, and Lord Shiva, the source of the universe, by the divine Sri, the goddess of beauty and prosperity, as well as by sages and other devotees, which move about in the forest along with their followers for the purpose of pasturing the cows, and which are tinged with the saffron paint from the bosom of gopi women. I shall surely behold the countenance of Sri Krishna, the bestower of liberation, with lovely cheeks and a shapely nose, and with reddish lotus-like eyes casting smiling glances and overhung by curly locks. For the deer walk to my right, indeed, referring to an auspicious omen of seeing deer walking on your right. If there comes about today a meeting with Lord Vishnu, the home of loveliness, who has of his own free will assumed a human semblance for relieving the burden of the earth, there is no denying the fact that my eyes will have easily attained the fruit of their existence. He is the spectator of the cause as well as of the effect, though free from egotism. In him, ignorance failing one's real character, as well as the notion of difference resulting from it, and the misconception arising from such a notion, stand eliminated by his own effulgence, in the form of eternal realization of his own essential character. And he is seen sporting in arbors, or the dwellings of the gopis of Vraja, in the company of jivas endowed with the vital principle, senses, and mind, and evolved in his own self, by his maya, under his own supervision. Utterances connected with his excellences, his compassion, etc., exploits, and avataranas that wipe out the sins of all and are attended with all excellent blessings, actually give new life and grace and lend sanctity to the universe, while those removed from them are, though adorned with figures of speech and other elegances, considered to be as good as a finely dressed and well-adorned corpse. Descended, as I understand, in the race of the Sattvatas, in order to bring happiness to the foremost of the immortals, maintaining ethical standards set up by himself, the same Lord is living at present in Vraja, spreading far and wide his glory, which the gods ever celebrate in song as the source of all blessings. I shall surely behold today that very Lord, who is the goal of exalted souls and the guru of the whole universe, and exhibits a form which is loved by the three worlds, provides a grand feast to those that have eyes, and is the coveted abode of Sri. All these mornings have revealed good omens to me. Alighted from the chariot immediately afterwards, I shall certainly bow at the feet of the almighty lords of the universe, the foremost persons, Valarama and Sri Krishna, which are cherished in their mind by great yogis for self-realization. And along with them, I shall greet their friends, as well as the other inhabitants of Raja, consisting mainly of woodland. Will the Lord place on my head, when I am fallen at the soles of his feet, his own lotus-like palm that has given assurances of safety to men terrified by the speed of the serpent of time and seeking shelter? Placing articles of worship in the hollow of that palm, Kaushika, a former Indra, attained the rulership of the three worlds, and pouring water into it, the Asura Bali, the celebrated Asura Raja and great devotee, secured a title to the sovereignty of the three worlds, since he is promised that he will be the next Indra. Nay, it relieved, the Lord's hand relieved, by its soft and fragrant touch, the fatigue of the women of Raja during the Rasa Leela, emitting as it did the fragrance of a Saugantika. A Saugantika is a particular variety of lotus known as being the strongest smelling lotus. Even though I have been sent by Kansa as his messenger, Sri Krishna, the immortal Lord, who is omniscient and the knower of all bodies and who witnesses with his unclouded vision the activity of the mind, existing as he does inside as well as outside the mind, will not, I am sure, harbor a feeling of enmity towards me. If he smilingly looks on me, fallen at the soles of his feet with a fully controlled mind and joined palms, with a compassionate eye, I shall forthwith be absolved from all sins and completely rid of all fear of rebirth, etc., experience supreme bliss. Again, when he folds in his long arms me, his most sincere friend and kinsman, exclusively devoted to him, my body will at once be actually turned into a veritable sanctuary, and my bonds in the form of karma will fall off from it. When I have thus enjoyed his blissful embrace and stand bowing low before him with joined palms, Sri Krishna of wide renown will address me in the words, Uncle Akrura. Then will my birth be fruitful. Fie upon that birth of him who is not accepted as his own by Sri Krishna, the Supreme Lord. Neither is anyone beloved of him, much less his dearest friend, nor again is anyone unwelcome, much less hateful or even worthy of being treated with indifference. Nevertheless, he loves his devotees in the same way as they love him, just as a wish-yielding tree grants the desire of men only when approached. Further, his elder brother, Valarama, the foremost of the Adus, would also smilingly embrace me, bowing low before him, when I bow low before him, and conduct me, caught by my joined palms, into the house, and will inquire in detail of me when I have received all attentions about the conduct of Kansa towards his kinsfolk. Sri Shuka continued, thus contemplating on Sri Krishna all the way, Akrura, the son of Svapalka, arrived in Vraja in the chariot, while the sun reached the western hill, the protector of men. In other words, the sun is getting low. He beheld in Vraja the footprints of Sri Krishna, the sacred dust of whose feet is borne on their crown by the guardians of all the worlds, which served as the ornaments of the earth and were distinguished by the marks of a lotus, a grain of barley, a goad, and so on. His impatience having been immensely heightened by the joy derived from their sight, his hair standing on end through love and his eyes bedimmed with teardrops, he jumped down from the chariot and rolled on the footprints, exclaiming, "Oh, these are the particles of dust of the Lord's feet." This much is the end to be attained by those invested with a body. That giving up hypocrisy, fear, and worry, they should cultivate through the sight of Sri Hari's images, the hearing of his praises, and so on, that ecstatic mood which was felt by Akrura from the time he received the mandate from Kansa. Presently he saw in Vraja Sri Krishna and Balarama, with eyes resembling a pair of autumnal lotuses, wearing yellow and blue garments, respectively, and present in the yard where cows were being milked. They were lads, dark and fair, respectively, the abodes of grace, with long arms and a lovely countenance, the foremost among the charming and having the prowess of young elephants. The two high-souled brothers were gracing the soil of Vraja by their feet, distinguished with the marks of a flag, the thunderbolt, a goad, and a lotus, and were casting all around glances accompanied with smiles full of compassion. Having bathed, they had put on immaculate clothes, were besmeared all over with sandal paste, which emitted a delightful odor, and adorned with necklaces of jewels and garlands of sylvan flowers, and were engaged in noble and charming leelas. They were the two foremost and most ancient persons, the causes as well as the rulers of the universe, descended for the sake of the world in their all blissful essence, as Balarama and Keshava. Shining like a rock of emerald and another of silver, covered with gold, the two divine brothers were ridding the quarters of their darkness with their own effulgence, O Parikshit. Hastily jumping down from the chariot and overwhelmed with affection, the aforesaid Akrura fell prostrate at the feet of Balarama and Sri Krishna. With his eyes blinded by tears of joy brought by the darshana of the Lord, and his frame covered with bristling hair, he was unable even to introduce himself by uttering his name, due to his throat being choked with emotion, O protector of men. Coming to know him, as well as of his intention, through inference, the Lord drew Akrura towards and near him with his hand, characterized by the mark of a discus, and full of delight embraced him. The high-minded Sankarshana, who is Balarama, also hugged Akrura, bowing low before him, and clasping his joined palms with his own, took him to his house in the company of his younger brother Sri Krishna. Then, inquiring about his safe arrival and giving him an excellent seat, Balarama washed Akrura's feet with due ceremony and fetched for him the Madhuparka offering, which is some honey, ghee, and curds. Again, bestowing on the guest a cow and massaging him, weary as he was, the Almighty Lord respectfully and with great reverence brought for him pure food endowed with manifold excellences. When he had finished his meal, Balarama, who knew the highest dharma in the shape of hospitality shown to a newcomer and so on, gave him supreme joy again by lovingly offering him articles such as betel and cardamoms, intended to scent his mouth after the meal, as well as perfumes and garlands. When he had thus been shown the customary hospitality, Nanda inquired of him, "Like the sheep having a butcher for their keeper, how are you getting on while the ruthless Kamsa is alive, O scion of Dasharha? We wonder what safety and truth could there be to you, the subjects of him who killed the babies of his screaming cousin, a wicked fellow given to the gratification of his own self that he is." Duly greeted thus with polite words by Nanda, who had already been subjected to similar polite inquiries, Akrura forgot the fatigue of his journey. Thus ends the 38th discourse, entitled Akrura's Arrival in Vraja, in the first half of Book 10 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 39, the departure of Sri Krishna and Valarama for Mathura. Sri Sukha began again. Having been comfortably seated on a couch and greatly honored by Valarama and Sri Krishna, Akrura actually realized all the aspirations that he had entertained on his way. What remains unattainable when the Lord, who is the abode of Sri, is pleased? Nevertheless, those exclusively devoted to him, O king, seek nothing, as a matter of fact. Having finished his supper, Lord Sri Krishna, the son of Devaki, inquired of Akrura about the conduct of Kansa towards his kinsmen, and what else was sought to be done by him. The glorious Lord said, "O dear uncle, O gentle one, I hope you came safely. May all be well with you. I believe no outrage has been perpetrated by the tyrant Kansa against your friends, your kinsmen, and other relations, and good health is enjoyed by them all. So long as Kansa, who though passing by the name of my maternal uncle is a pestilence to my family, is thriving, O dear uncle, what good indeed is our asking about the welfare of our kinsmen and their progeny? Oh, great has been the suffering of our noble parents for our sake. It was due to us that the death of their other sons took place, and it was on account of us that bondage was accepted by them. Luckily has the sight of our kinsmen in yourself, O gentle one, been vouchsafed today to us, by whom it was long coveted. Now the motive of your visit, O dear uncle, may be communicated." Sri Sukha continued. Questioned by the Lord, as aforesaid, Akrura, a scion of Madhu, related everything: the inveteracy of Kansa's enmity to the Yadus and his attempt to kill Vasudeva, with what message and for what purpose Akrura himself had been sent by Kansa as his emissary, and what was communicated to him by Narada regarding his having been born of Anakarundhabi. Sri Krishna and Bala, the slayer of hostile warriors, heartily laughed to hear the message of Akrura and apprised their father Nanda of the king's command. Nanda too duly instructed the Gopas. Let all the yield of the cows be collected. Take presents and let bullock carts be got ready. We shall proceed tomorrow to Mathura. and shall present to the king delicious substances such as milk, curds, and ghee, and witness the grand festival of the Dhanusha Yajna. I hear the people of the entire kingdom are going. Nanda, the chief of the Gopas, caused this to be proclaimed by the watchmen all over his Vraja. The Gopi women, of whom so much has been said before, were sore distressed to hear at that time of Akrura having arrived in Vraja to take Balarama and Sri Krishna to the capital. Some had the splendor of their countenance marred by the hot breaths proceeding from the agony caused by that news. Others found their scarfs and bangles slipping off, and their braid knots loosened, because they were so distressed they didn't tie them properly, and so on. Others, who had the functions of all their senses suspended by concentrated thought of Sri Krishna, had no consciousness left of their physical body, as though they had risen to the realm of the spirit. Other women fainted as they recalled the talks of Sri Krishna, which touched the very chords of their heart and consisted of wonderful expressions and were uttered with smiles full of love. Thinking of the most graceful gait and movements, glances accompanied by loving smiles, jokes that dissipated grief, and the extraordinary exploits of Sri Krishna, the bestower of liberation, the gopis, who were terror-stricken and agitated by the thought of the impending separation, met together in groups and feelingly talked to one another the whole night with tears on their faces and their minds absorbed in Sri Krishna, the immortal Lord. The gopis said, "O Creator, there is no compassion anywhere in you, since, having united embodied souls through friendly behavior and affection, you disunite them even when they have not yet fully realized their ambition. Your capricious acts are as aimless as the movements of a baby. Having once revealed the face of Sri Krishna, the bestower of liberation, with lovely cheeks and his prominent nose, overhung by dark curly locks and charming with a gentle smile that dispels all grief, you are now screening it from our view. This act of yours is far from good. You are cruel indeed, in that under the appellation of Akrura, whose name means not cruel, you are like an ignorant person, taking away from us the eye given by yourself, with which we witnessed all your creative skill, concentrated in a single limb of Sri Madhusudana. Alas, the darling of Nanda himself, whose friendship is but momentary, and who is fond of the new, does not even gaze on us, who have been enslaved by the spell cast by himself, and who directly sought his service, renouncing our homes, relations, sons, and husbands. Happy will be the dawn following this night for the ladies of the city. Their aspirations have been surely realized. They will fondly gaze on the countenance, full of nectarian smiles exhibited by the corners of eyes, of Sri Krishna, the Lord of Vraja, even as he fearlessly enters the city. How then will Sri Krishna, the bestower of liberation, return to us, helpless rustic women, even though he has got other relations too in Vraja? And although he is self-possessed, and his mind is captivated by the utterances sweet as honey of those ladies of Mathura, and remains deluded by their bashful smiles and amorous glances, today surely a grand feast awaits in Mathura, awaits the eyes of the Dasharhas, the Bhojas, the Anthakas, the Vrishnis, and the Sattvatas, who will behold Sri Krishna, the son of Yashoda, the spouse of Sri, and the one abode of all excellences, as well as to the eyes of those that will see him driving on the road to Mathura. Akrura should not have been the name of such a ruthless fellow, who is extremely hard-hearted in that he is going to take Sri Krishna, who is dearer than life, beyond the familiar path, not caring to comfort us womenfolk, sore distressed as we are. Sri Krishna, whose mind is altogether devoid of the moisture of love, is already comfortably seated in the chariot, and following him, those arrogant gopas and their bullock carts are urging Akrura to make haste. On top of it, the aged ones have grown indifferent and do not interfere, and fate is working against us today. Let us politely approach Sri Krishna, that scion of Madhu, and stop him. What harm can the elders of the race or our relations do to us who stand deprived by providence of Sri Krishna's company, which could not be easily foregone even for half a second, and are so distressed in mind? How shall we, O Gopi women, be able, in fact, to get over the anguish of separation, which is so difficult to overcome, without him, in whose company a number of nights were spent by us, as an instant in the Rasa assembly, enlivened by his winsome smiles, charming whispers, playful glances and embraces, all of which were inspired by his love? How can we really survive without him, who, while entering Vraja at the close of the day, accompanied by Balarama of infinite strength, and surrounded by Gopa boys and playing on the flute, his curly locks and wreaths of flowers covered all over with the dust raised by the hoofs of the cows. He used to captivate our mind with his sidelong glances full of smiles. Sri Sukha went on. Talking to one another in this strain and sore afflicted at the thought of separation, the women of Raja, whose mind was deeply attached to Sri Krishna, cried loudly, casting all bashfulness to the winds, O protector of cows, O Damodara, O scion of Madhu. In spite of the womenfolk wailing as aforesaid, now that the sun had risen, Akrura, who had just finished his Sandhya prayers to the sun god and other devotions, presently drove his chariot in the direction of Mathura. The Gopas, headed by Nanda, thereupon closely followed him on their bullock carts, taking with them abundant presents, including pitchers full of the yield of cows, some of milk, some of curd, some of ghee. The Gopi women too followed their beloved Sri Krishna, and delighted by his turning round and casting loving glances at them, they paused, awaiting the Lord's message in reply to theirs. Observing them suffering agony as aforesaid at his departure, Sri Krishna, the foremost of the Yadus, comforted them with messages full of love, sent through a messenger, saying, I shall come. As long as the flag of Sri Krishna's chariot was visible, and so long as the dust raised by the chariot continued to be seen, the gopis, who had sent their mind after the Lord, were seen like so many painted figures. Hopeless of Govinda's return, they retraced their steps, and, rid of grief by his loving assurances, passed their days and nights celebrating in songs the leelas of their beloved Lord. The Lord, for his part, safely reached, about noon, with Balarama and Akrura, a protector of men, the bank of the Kalindi river that washes off all sin, in his chariot swift as wind. Washing there his hands and feet, etc., and drinking of its sweet water, green as an emerald, he went near a cluster of trees where the chariot was made to stand, and got into the chariot along with Balarama. Helping the two brothers to get into the chariot and taking leave of them, Akrura returned for his midday devotions to the pool. This particular pool in the Yamuna is known by the name of Anantatirtha, or it's also called Brahmarhrada. So he went to this particular pool in the Yamuna. The Kalindi and the Yamuna are two names for the same river, and performed his ablutions with due ceremony. Plunging in that water and muttering the holy Gayatri mantra, the essence of the eternal Veda, Akrura beheld in the water the same Balarama and Sri Krishna seated together. And he thought to himself, how can the two sons of Anakadundabhi who are seated in the chariot be here? If they are here, they should not be in the chariot. Saying so, he emerged from the water and perceived the two brothers seated even there in the chariot, as heretofore. He therefore took a plunge again, saying to himself, is my having seen them in the water false? This time he saw in that very water, being glorified by Siddhas, Charanas, Gandharvas, and Asuras, with bent heads, the 1,000-headed god Shesha, the lord of serpents, with his 1,000 hoods protected by diadems, clad in blue silk, himself white as lotus fiber, and rooted there like Mount Kailasa, that silvery mountain with its golden peaks. He further beheld on the coils of the serpent god, Lord Vishnu, the supreme person, dark as a cloud, clad in yellow silk, possessed of 4 arms and eyes reddish like lotus petals, and looking serene. He wore a lovely and cheerful countenance with winsome smiles and glances, shapely eyebrows, a prominent nose, beautiful ears, charming cheeks and ruddy lips. He had pretty long and plump arms, high shoulders, a breast which is the abode of Sri, a conch-shaped neck, a deep navel, and a belly shaped like a leaf and marked with folds. He had bulky buttocks and hips and a pair of thighs, tapering like the outer edge of the hand from the wrist to the root of the little finger, a pair of well-formed knees, as well as a pair of shapely shanks. He had prominent ankles and was enveloped with rays of light radiating from the ruddy nails of his toes, and had lotus-like feet, charming with toes and a pair of big toes tender as petals. He shone resplendent with a diadem, bracelets, and armlets set with most valuable gems, as well as with a girdle, a sacred thread, necklaces, and pairs of anklets and earrings, and held a lotus and a conch, a discus and a mace. His breast was distinguished with a white curl of hair. The Kaustupa gem was shining at his neck, and he was adorned with a garland of sylvan flowers. He was being glorified through praises expressive of divergent sentiments by attendants, the foremost of whom were Sunanda and Nanda, and who severally occupied the four quarters and the four intermediate points. The sage Sanaka and his three brothers Sanandana, Sanatana, and Sanat Kumara, all of whom, including Sanaka, were standing behind the Lord. The chiefs of gods, headed by Brahma and Lord Shiva, all of whom occupied a position to his right. The 9 foremost Brahmanas, Marichi and others, who stood to his left, as well as by the foremost of the Lord's devotees of pure mind, such as Prahlada, Narada, and the Vasu Uparichara by name, all of whom stood in front of the Lord. He was also waited upon by Sri, the goddess of beauty and good fortune, Pushti, the goddess presiding over nutrition, Saraswati, the goddess presiding over speech, Kanti, the goddess presiding over splendor, Kirti, the goddess presiding over glory, Tushti, the goddess presiding over contentment, Ila, the goddess earth, Urja, the goddess presiding over omnipotence, Vidya, the goddess presiding over spiritual enlightenment, conducive to liberation, Avidya, the goddess presiding over nescience or ignorance, which binds the jiva to mundane existence, Shakti, the foremost of all divine energies, here going by the name of Hladini, or the delighting potency, and Maya, the cause of Vidya and Avidya both. Extremely rejoiced to perceive the Lord and summoning his presence of mind, Akrura of the Satvata clan, full of supreme devotion, greeted the Lord with his head bent low, and with joined palms and a concentrated mind, slowly proceeded to extol the Lord in a voice choked with emotion, his hair standing on end and his mind and eyes moistened with love. Thus ends the 39th discourse, forming part of the story of Akrura's withdrawal to Mathura, and the first half of Book 10 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 40, Akrura's eulogy of the Lord. Akrura prayed, I bow to you, Lord Narayana, the most ancient and undecaying person, the cause of all causes, from the lotus bud sprung from whose navel emerged Brahma, from whom evolved this creation. Whatever causes there are, the earth, water, fire, the air, ether, and its cause, the Mahatattva, Prakriti, as well as its cause, the mind, the Indriyas, the objects of all the senses, as well as the deities presiding over them, have all evolved from your divine person. All these, Prakriti and so on, which are perceived, fail to know your essential character because of their being material, while you are the spirit. The celebrated Brahma, who is conditioned by the modes of Prakriti, is unable to know your reality, which lies beyond the 3 gunas. Pious yogis directly worship you as indwelling the limbs of the body, informing all material bodies and presiding over the bodies of the gods, the inner controller and ruler of the universe. Some Brahmanas, given to sacrificial performance, worship you alone under the name of gods invested with different forms, through extensive sacrifices as revealed by the 3 Vedas. Some men of wisdom, who have developed dispassion, worship you, the embodiment of consciousness, through sacrifice in the form of spiritual enlightenment, renouncing all actions. And having consecrated themselves and absorbed in you, others worship you in a plurality of forms, or in one form, according to the procedure taught by yourself. Others duly worship you alone in the form of Shiva, along the lines recommended by Shiva, differing in detail according to the teachings of a plurality of teachers, O Almighty Lord. Even those who are devoted to other deities, although they look upon those gods as other than you, O Lord, all worship you alone, the Almighty God representing all the gods. As rivers having their source in a mountain and made full by the god of rain, O Lord, find their way into the ocean from all sides, so do all paths ultimately lead to you alone. Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas are the modes of your Prakriti, Hence, those endowed with a material body, from the inanimate creatures to Brahma, enter into them, and they into Prakriti, merging into you. Salutation be to you, whose mind is unattached, identified as you are with all and the witness of all minds. This stream of the gunas, brought about by avidya, operates on those that are identified with a celestial, human, or subhuman form. Fire has been conceived to be your mouth, the earth as your feet, the sun as your eye, the sky as your navel, and the quarters as your ears, the highest heaven as the top part of your head, the chiefs of gods as your arms, the oceans as your abdomen, and the air as your life breath and strength. Trees and annual plants are looked upon as the hair on your body, clouds as your locks, the mountains as the bones and nails of your transcendent self, day and night as the twinkling of your eyes, Brahma as your membrum virile, and rainfall as your semen. Conceived in you, the perfect and imperishable person, who can be hinted at by the mind. The universes, teeming with innumerable jivas, with their guardians, move about like the eggs of tiny aquatic creatures in water, or even like the insects in an udumbara fruit, which is a fig. With their grief dispelled by the thought of the several forms you assume for the sake of sport, people sing your glory with delight. Hail to you who appeared as the divine fish from a definite motive and roamed through the ocean that deluged the world at the time of universal dissolution. Salutation to you, the slayer of Madhu and Kaitabha in the person of Hayagriva. Hail to you as the gigantic tortoise, or rather turtle, that supported Mount Mandara. Salutation to you in the form of the divine boar that sported for lifting up the earth. Hail to you in the form of a weird lion, a dispeller of the fears of the righteous. Salutation to you again as the divine dwarf, who covered the three worlds in one stride. Hail to you in the form of, technically he covered the three worlds in 3 strides, but hail to you in the form of Parashurama, who cut down the forest of haughty kshatriyas. Salutation to you as Sri Rama, the chief of the Raghus, who put an end to Ravana. Hail, hail to you manifested in the forms of Vasudeva, Sankarshana, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha. Salutation to you, the protector of the Sattvatas. Hail to you as Lord Buddha, who was faultless, and who deluded the Daityas and the Danavas. Salutation, this is obviously referring to some prior Buddha avatar, and not our Gautama Buddha, who came after Krishna. There's different Puranas refer to multiple Buddhas in the various cycles of avatars throughout the yugas. Salutation to you in the form of Lord Kalki, as the destroyer of Kshatriyas, who will have well nigh been reduced to the position of mlechas. O Lord, infatuated by your Maya, and clinging to the body and those connected with it as the very self and as one's own, this world of living beings is made to revolve in the maze of karma. I too revolve in the domain of the body, offspring, homestead, wife, wealth, relations, and so on, which are all like a dream, thinking them to be real, a fool that I am, O Almighty Lord. Holding as a matter of fact a contrary view with regard to the transient and to that which is not the self, as well as about that which is rooted in sorrow, and taking delight in pairs of opposites, I am unable to know you who are dear to me, enveloped as I am in ignorance. As an ignorant person would actually run after a mirage, abandoning water screened by its own products, like duckweeds and other aquatic plants, so have I turned my face towards the body, etc., leaving you. Possessed of a poor understanding, clouded by an appetite for sensuous pleasures, I am not able to restrain my mind, agitated as it is by cravings and activities of various kinds, and dragged here and there by the turbulent senses. As such, I have sought as my refuge your feet, which are difficult of access to the unrighteous. This too, I think, is possible only with your grace. Devotion to you comes through the service of holy men, when the end of birth and death for a man draws near, O Lord, with a lotus sprung from your navel. Hail to you who are all perfect and possessed of endless potencies, are invested with a body consisting of consciousness, the source of all knowledge and the ruler of all those that control the jiva. Salutation to you, the deity presiding over the intellect, the abode of all created beings. Hail to you, O ruler of the senses in the forms of Pradyumna and Aniruddha. Protect me, fallen at your feet, O Lord. Thus ends the 40th discourse, entitled Akrura's Eulogy of the Lord, and the first half of Book 10 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 41, the entry into Mathura. Sri Shuka began again. Having shown to Akrura his form underwater, Lord Sri Krishna withdrew it again, even while Akrura was eulogizing him, just as an actor would wind up his part. Perceiving the vision withdrawn and emerging from the water, Akrura also hurriedly finished all his unavoidable routine of devotions and returned wonderstruck to the chariot. Sri Krishna, the ruler of the senses, asked him, "What wonder did you see now, on earth, in the heavens, or in the water?" "We conclude you to have witnessed something unusual." Akrura replied, "Whatever wonders there are on this earth and the firmament or in water exist in you who ensoul the universe. What wonder can therefore remain unseen by me when I am directly looking at you? When I am gazing on yourself, in whom all marvels exist, O infinite Lord, what miracle could have been seen by me elsewhere, on this earth, in the sky, or in water?" Observing thus, Akrura, the son of Gandhini, drove his chariot and brought Balarama and Sri Krishna to Mathura at the decline of the day. People from the country, O Raja, who flocked at every stage on the road, felt delighted to behold the two sons of Vasudeva and could not withdraw their eyes from them. Meanwhile, the people of Raja, headed by Nanda, the chief of the Gopas, reached a garden in the precinct of the city in advance and stood waiting there for Balarama and Sri Krishna. Having joined them, Lord Sri Krishna, the rulers of the universe, clasped with his own hand the hand of Akrura, who stood bent low with reverence, and spoke to him as though laughing heartily. "Enter you the city in advance with the chariot and return home. We, however, shall presently take down our things here, and having rested a while, shall then visit the city." Akrura submitted, "Bereft of you both, I shall not enter Mathura, O Lord. You ought not to abandon me, your devotee, my master, fond of your votaries. Come, let us go together. Grace our house, O Lord, who are above sense perception, with the presence of its master, visiting it along with Balarama, as well as with your near and dear ones and other cowherds, O best friend. Please sanctify our house, householders as we are, with the dust of your feet. With the water washing your feet, the Pitris, as well as the gods, including the fire god, get eternally propitiated. By washing both your feet, the celebrated Asura Raja Bali not only became worthy of sacred renown and great in point of merits, but also attained incomparable affluence and power, as well as the goal which is reached by those exclusively devoted to you. The waters that washed your feet when you measured the earth and heaven, and were thus hallowed, sanctified all the three worlds. The Lord Shiva bore them on his head, and the sons of Sagara attained to heaven. Salutation be to you, O Lord of the universe, adored by the gods, the hearing and recital of whose praises brings merit, O jewel among the Yadus, O Narayana of excellent renown." The glorious Lord said, "Accompanied by my elder brother, I shall visit your house when I have slain Kansa and bring delight to my relations." Sri Shuka continued, "Thus spoken to by the Lord, the aforesaid Akrura entered the city like one sad at heart, and having apprised, because he has to temporarily be parted from Krishna, and having apprised Kansa of what he had done, returned home. Accompanied by Sankarshana and surrounded by the Gopas, Lord Sri Krishna, who was eager to have a look at the city, fearlessly entered Mathura the following afternoon. He saw the city with high gateways in its fortification wall and portals of its houses, made of crystal and fitted with huge doors of gold and embellished with ornamental arches, also of gold over them. It had granaries, etc., of copper and brass, had been rendered difficult of access by a moat, and was adorned with gardens and delightful parks. It was graced with sheds of gold erected on the crossroads, mansions and rest houses also of gold, halls for the meeting together of individuals following a particular trade, and other public buildings, and was resonant with the noise of pigeons and peacocks perched on small wooden sheds erected in front of houses, platforms under them, air holes into pavements, all inlaid with cat's eyes, diamonds, crystals, sapphires, corals, pearls, and emeralds. Its roads, its marketplaces, streets, and quadrangles were profusely sprinkled with water, and it was strewn with flowers, sprouts of barley, parched paddy, and rice grains. The entrances of its houses were artistically adorned on both sides with a pitcher full of water and sprinkled with curds and sandal paste, surrounded with rows of flowers and crowned with rows of lights, with bunches of leaves thrust into their mouth and strips of silk tied around their necks, and with trunks of plantain and areca nut trees, along with bunches of fruits fixed beside them, and festive flags hoisted near them. Eager to have a look at the two sons of Vasudeva, who had duly entered the city by the main road and were surrounded with their companions, the women of the city hurriedly came together at every stage and climbed up the mansions lining the road, O protector of men. Some ran with their garments and jewels wrongly placed, while others came out forgetting one of the ornaments worn in pairs. Some left with ornaments on one ear and with anklet on one ankle, while others painted only one of their eyes with collyrium, omitting to paint the other. Full of joy, some who were taking their meal went away leaving it. Others who were being smeared with oil came away without taking their bath. Some who were lying asleep sprang on their feet as soon as they heard the noise, while mothers who were fondly suckling their babies sallied forth, leaving the baby crying. Possessed of the gait of a lordly elephant in rut, Sri Krishna of lotus-like eyes captivated their mind by his smiles and glances full of charming sport, providing a feast to their eyes by the sight of his divine personality, the delight of Sri. Beholding him, who had already been heard of by them many a time before, and feeling honored by being sprinkled with the nectar of his penetrating glances and unreserved smiles, the women of Mathura, whose mind had already taken wings after him, mentally embraced that embodiment of bliss, now that he had been ushered into their mind through the gateway of their eyes, thrilling all over with joy, and shed their agony which knew no bounds, O queller of your foes. Standing on the top of mansions, their lotus-like faces blooming with delight, the women covered Bala and Sri Krishna with showers of flowers. At every step, overjoyed Brahmanas worshipped the two brothers with curds and unbroken grains of rice, with which they adorned their foreheads as a mark of auspiciousness, garlands and perfumes, offerings in the shape of sweets and fruits, as well as with vessels full of water for washing their hands and feet with. The women of the city said to one another, "Oh, what great austerities did the Gopi women perform, by virtue of which they actually behold without interruption the two brothers who afford great delight to the human world." Seeing a certain washerman, who was also a dyer of clothes, coming that way, Sri Krishna, the elder brother of Gada, calling him the elder brother of Gada is a reference to that the foremost of Sri Krishna's half-brothers, next to Valarama, who was born of Devarakshita, one of the 13 wives of Vasudeva and a sister of Devaki, gave birth to 9 sons, the eldest of whom was Gada. Sri Krishna asked this washerman and clothes dyer, asked of him the very best and most well-washed clothes. Said, "Give us both, who deserve the gift, eminently suitable clothes, O dear one. The highest blessing will be yours if you make the gift. There is no doubt about it." Solicited by the Lord, who was most perfect in every way, that extremely arrogant servant of the king of Mathura angrily and tauntingly replied, "Do you always wear such clothes alone, roaming as you do on the mountain and in the woods, that transcending all bounds of propriety you dare seek to have royal goods? Get away, O foolish ones. You should never make such requests if you wish to survive. The king's men actually put in bonds, slay and strip the insolent of their possessions." While he was thus bragging and threatening, Sri Krishna, the son of Devaki, got angry and severed the head of the washerman from his body with his fingertips. Leaving the bundles of clothes, all his servants ran away in every direction, and Sri Krishna, the immortal Lord, seized the clothes. Putting on 2 pieces of cloth, each of their choice, one about the loins and the other across the shoulder, baldric-wise. Baldric-wise is a way of saying over one shoulder and diagonally across the chest was the fashion of wearing the upper cloth. Sri Krishna and Sankarshana distributed the rest among the other gopas according to their liking, casting some on the ground. Then again, a weaver full of love adorned the 2 brothers with ornaments of cloth of various colors in a befitting manner. With their decorations of divergent patterns, Sri Krishna and Valarama shone brightly like a pair of young elephants, one dark and the other white, tastefully adorned on a festive occasion. Pleased with the weaver, the Lord conferred on him similarity of form with himself, as well as, in other words, bestowed on him sarupya moksha, as well as great prosperity, physical strength, authority, God consciousness, and acuteness of the senses in the world. Next, the 2 brothers went to the house of the florist, Sudama. Seeing them, Sudama respectfully rose and bowed to them with his head placed on the ground. Fetching a seat as well as water to wash their feet with, he offered worship to them along with their followers, with water to wash their hands with, and other articles of worship, including garlands, betel leaves seasoned with katachu, lime and areca nut parings, and sandal paste. He submitted, "Thanks to your advent, O Lord. Fruitful is our birth and hallowed is our race. Indeed, the ancestors, the gods, and the rishis are pleased with me. The ultimate cause of the whole universe, you 2, I understand, have appeared on this earth by your own will for the protection as well as for the growth of the world. Even though you love him who worships you, your eye is never discriminating inasmuch as you are the disinterested friends, the self of the universe, and the same to all created beings. As such, be pleased to command me, both of you, what service can I render to you? Indeed, this constitutes a great boon to a man, that he is entrusted by you with some service." Saying so, and divining the wishes of the Lord, O King of Kings, Sudama, whose mind was full of joy, presented to the 2 brothers garlands made of excellent flowers of superb fragrance. Charmingly adorned with them along with their followers and full of delight, Sri Krishna and Balarama, the bestowers of boons, conferred boons on the florist, who stood bent low with reverence and sought their protection. He asked for the boon of unflinching devotion to Sri Krishna alone, the self of all, as well as friendship with his devotees and supreme compassion for all created beings. Having thus conferred his desired boons, as well as a fortune that would grow in the hands of his posterity, physical strength, longevity, glory, and splendor, as extra unasked for boons, the Lord departed along with Balarama. Thus ends the 41st discourse, entitled The Entry into Mathura, and the first half of Book 10 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 42, a description of the amphitheater for wrestlers. Sri Shuka began again. Proceeding further along the main road, Sri Krishna, the scion of Madhu, who affords delight liberally to all, saw a hunchbacked young woman of comely appearance passing that way with a vessel full of sandal paste used for smearing one's body with, and laughingly questioned her. "Hello, who are you, O handsome woman, and for whom is this sandal paste intended? Please tell us the truth. Give us both the excellent paste. Good will betide you not long afterwards through this." The maidservant replied, "I am a maidservant, Trivakra by name, esteemed by Kamsa for my art of preparing sandal pastes, O pretty youth. Sandal paste prepared by me is much to the taste of the ruler of the Bhojas. Who else other than you 2 deserves it?" Her mind bewitched by the comeliness and delicacy of form, loving disposition, laughter, conversation, and penetrating glances at the 2 brothers, the hunchback gave them both the thick sandal paste. Painted severally with the pigment which shone in contrast with their complexion and adorned the upper part of their body, they looked most charming. The propitious Lord made up his mind to straighten the hunchback, who was curved at 3 places, though possessed of a charming countenance, showing the reward of his sight. Pressing the forepart of her feet with his own feet, and supporting her chin on his index and middle fingers, raised upwards of his open right hand, Sri Krishna, the infallible Lord, straightened up her body. By the magic touch of Sri Krishna, the bestower of liberation, she then turned at once into a most beautiful woman with a straight and symmetrical body, bulky hips, and full breasts. Endowed with the wealth of beauty and good qualities, Trivakra, who had the fire of love kindled in her heart, then smilingly submitted to Sri Krishna, pulling the end of his upper garment. "Come, O gallant youth, let us go home. I am unable to leave you here. Be gracious to me, whose mind has been robbed of its patience by you, O jewel among men." Being solicited by the woman thus, while Balarama stood looking on, Sri Krishna gazed on Trivakra's face, as well as on that of his followers, and laughingly replied to her, "Having accomplished my errand, I shall call at your house, which assuages the agony of men, O pretty girl, for you are the last refuge of us shelterless wayfarers." Dismissing her with these honeyed words, and proceeding further along the road, Sri Krishna, along with Balarama, his elder brother, was honored by those following the trade of a merchant with various presents: betel leaves seasoned with katachu, lime and areca nut parings, garlands, and sandal paste. Due to agitation of mind caused by love at his sight, the women of Mathura forgot all about themselves. Standing spellbound with their garments unsettled, bangles slipped off, and braids loosened, they looked like painted figures. Inquiring of the citizens about the place where the bow had been kept for the purpose of the Dhanusha Yajna, Sri Krishna, the immortal Lord, then entered the Yajnashala, the sacrificial hall, and beheld there the wonderful bow, which resembled the rainbow, studded as it was with jewels of various colors, was guarded by many men, had been duly worshipped, and was attended with a large fortune in the shape of valuable gold ornaments. And even though being stopped by the men, he forcibly seized the bow. Having strung the bow, which had been playfully lifted with his left hand, and pulling the string to its utmost capacity, Lord Sri Krishna broke it in two in the middle in the twinkling of an eye, while the man guarding the bow stood looking on, as an elephant in a rut would snap a sugar cane. The crash of the bow while it was being broken filled heaven and earth and the intermediate region, as well as the four quarters. Hearing it, Kamsa was seized with consternation. Full of wrath and eager to apprehend the Lord, the custodians of the bow, along with their followers, surrounded him with their bows drawn in order to kill him, or take him captive, exclaiming, "Let the intruder be seized, let him be bound." Immediately perceiving them to be of wicked intent, Balarama and Sri Krishna grew angry, and seizing the two pieces of the broken bow, made short work of them. Having also destroyed a detachment sent by Kansa, the two brothers came away through the entrance of the amphitheater, and roamed about delighted to witness the wealth of the city. Perceiving such wonderful prowess, indomitable spirit, intrepidity, and comeliness of the two brothers, the citizens thought them to be two foremost gods. While they were roving at will, the sun set on them. Surrounded by the Gopas, Sri Krishna and Balarama returned to their carts outside the city. In the case of those who gazed in Mathura on the elegance of the personality of Sri Krishna, jewel among men, which, lo, Sri coveted as her abode, leaving all others who sought her, the predictions that the Gopi women, afflicted at the thought of their separation, had made at the time of departure from Vraja of Sri Krishna, came to be true. With their feet duly washed and partaking of rice cooked in milk with sugar, and having come to know what Kansa intended to do the next day, the two brothers passed that night happily. Kansa, on the other hand, felt dismayed to hear of the breaking of the huge bow and the destruction of its keepers, as well as of his own detachment, which was a mere child's play on the part of Sri Krishna, the protector of cows, and Balarama. Getting no sleep for a long time, the evil-minded fellow saw both in dream and while awake many an evil portent, foreboding death and foreshadowing infamy. Even though his reflection could be seen in a mirror, the head was not visible. The luminaries in the sky likewise appeared duplicated, although no other object intervened. Holes were seen by him in his shadow, and the whizzing sound which is heard inside the ears on closing them was not heard by him. Trees appeared to him golden in hue, and he failed to see his footprints on sands or mud. In dreams he was embraced by his deceased relations, rode on a donkey, swallowed poison, and went about all alone, adorned with a wreath of China roses, smeared with oil and having no covering on his body except the quarters. Beholding similar other scenes, both in dreams and in waking life, and terribly afraid of death, Kansa did not have a wink of sleep in his anxiety. Evidently a wink of sleep other than these fitful dreams. When the night passed and the sun rose from the eastern waters, O scion of Kuru, Kansa actually had a grand festival of wrestling bouts to be celebrated. The men of Kansa swept the arena, sprinkled it with water, and decorated it with flowers and garlands, etc. Trumpets and tabors were sounded, and the galleries for the spectators were adorned with garlands, flags, tapestries, and temporary arches. On them were comfortably seated the people of the city and the country, headed by Brahmanas and Kshatriyas, as well as chiefs and princes on their respective thrones. Surrounded by ministers, Kansa took his seat on the royal dais in the midst of feudal lords and with a sore, aching heart. Amidst a flourish of trumpets, which was drowned at intervals by the clapping of the wrestlers' arms, proud wrestling champions, picturesquely adorned, majestically entered the arena along with their masters. Feeling greatly cheered by the stirring trumpets and other instruments, Chanura, Mushtika, Kutta, Shala, and Toshala, too, eminent wrestlers, found their way into the arena. Specially invited by Kansa, the ruler of the Bhojas, the aforementioned Gopas, headed by Nanda, the chief of the Gopas, who had just offered their presents, took their seats on a separate dais. Thus ends the 42nd discourse, entitled A Description of the Amphitheater for Wrestlers, in the first half of Book 10 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. And I feel like that might be a good stopping point. It's almost 10 o'clock, and that ends the first day of arrival and sightseeing and so on. And the next whole bunch of discourses describe the action of the big day. So that seems like a good piece to do all together next time. Thank you guys all very much for coming.
Thanks, Deva. Awesome.
Thank you, Deva.
I have a question. If anyone
cares
is up for discussion a little bit,
sure.
or just
clarification. Sure.
Thank you. Always wondered about, I assume there are different versions of it, but the departure of Krishna from Vrindavan.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what we just read today, I guess, huh?
That was part of it, yeah.
Home village today, yeah. And, he leaves, of course, he leaves Radha.
Yes.
Now, so this is kind of a more broad question. What is it an exemplification of Dharma that Vishnu in his embodiment doesn't really have successful relationships with Lakshmi's Maha avatars, like Sita and now Radha?
Yeah.
It's just been always perplexing to me. Like there's so much about Vishnu, Krishna, Ram, and then that's just so obviously universal and perfect. And then there's these moments where, like what happened to Radha? I've heard versions that she was in agony the rest of her life, like living a humble life and really sad. But I don't know. Maybe that's a different yuga or
yeah. The Bhagavatam does not get into Radha. It actually never even mentions her name, although it does refer to one special gopi, whose name is never given. Some of the other Puranas do get into Radha, and other texts. Radha, the versions that do get into the rest of Radha's life, there was an agony of separation initially, but Radha experienced herself to still be with Krishna. The descriptions of it say that she continued to go to the forest every day and talk and play and act as if he was there, even though no one else could see him with her.
Wow.
And describe scenes of other gopis going to her and asking her what she's doing, and her saying that her kanha, as she would call him, is there with her and asking, "Can't you see him?" And continuing completely into bliss as if he was with her. Such was the strength of her devotion, that she essentially summoned him to her presence privately for herself. And so much so that when Krishna in his embodied form actually visited Vrindavana again, Radha didn't go to see him because she felt so united with him the whole time that to her, the physical body was of no significance anymore.
Wow.
She would have considered herself no more with him physically than non-physically.
Wow.
So absolutely united in divine union, essentially, was she in her inner consciousness.
I like that version.
Yeah. We do hear a little bit more about the other gopis in the Bhagavatam, actually, because he does visit again, and also Balarama once visits by himself. So we will hear a little bit more of them, and it describes their state of consciousness and what they're up to. So we will be getting to that.
Oh, wow.
It gets more into that. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. But it also does get into Krishna having very successful relationships with other forms of Lakshmi. Radha was not Lakshmi's only avatar with Krishna. We will be getting into other ones in coming discourses.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah. All of Krishna's wives, who he later goes on to marry, were also avatars of Lakshmi. There's 8 chief of them. The most famous two are Rukmini and Satyabhama, but we'll hear about lots of them. So yeah, lots more on that coming in upcoming discourses.
Wow. Great.
Yeah.
Quick question.
Mm-hmm.
They mentioned, I practice Agnihotra, and one of the things with that is we always we're taught to separate the broken grains of rice, chipped and broken grains of rice, cracked grains, and they mentioned that today during a ceremony. What's the significance of that? I've always wondered to know more in depth about that.
Yeah, so rice is used in a lot of ceremonies. It's from the Vedas. Rice is seen as an embodiment of the goddess Sri, who, in addition to being the goddess of prosperity and beauty and so on, is also specifically the goddess of rice. And yeah, in some cases, unhusked grain is used for certain ceremonies. In other cases, husked or threshed, where the rice is in its original shell versus the shell being broken off, like you described. Rice is kind of seen as like an embodiment of the divinely given prosperity of the earth. It's the staple crop of most of India. And so it's kind of seen as like the embodiment of the life-giving gifts of the earth and a sort of basic symbol of communion between the divine and all life sustained by it. So it gets used in that sense as an offering of gratitude for the fruits of the earth and for the sustenance of life in the body, in a whole bunch of different Vedic rituals and contexts.
And so the brokenness of a grain, when a grain is broken or cracked,
yeah,
is kind of a symbol.
It's essentially like a symbol of the gift being used, like because the threshing of rice was a huge part of Vedic life for particularly for Vaishyas and Shudras, who were most people. The threshing of rice is a big step of taking the gifts, the divine gifts of the earth and making them usable. It's kind of like seen as the process of appreciating and transmuting the gift and accepting it. So yeah, there's all sorts of agricultural symbolism like that used in a lot of different Vedic rituals because it was a huge and important part of people's lives.
Wow.
Still is for tons of people. You can go and see people like in plenty of Indian villages, people still thresh rice the old way, like with their feet, or just like, you know, holding. A lot of them just like kind of hold on. They put a bunch of rice in a shed, and then they kind of have like a little, like a wooden pole with a wheel that you can just kind of hang on to for balance, and you just step on the rice going around and break it all under your feet. That's how a lot of them still do it. And there's like, you know, millions and millions of Indian villagers who, and not just Indian, but all throughout huge parts of Asia, and who still live that way. And in the context of that, the symbolism becomes really obvious of a lot of the Vedic rituals, what it would mean to people, and like expressing that this is such an integrated part of their lives, of transmuting the divine gifts of nature into that which sustains them, and so on.
Cool. Wow. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, yep.
Gada's a cool character. Krishna's younger brother. I guess I didn't know about Gada before.
Gada? Yeah. Well, he has a lot of brothers. If you get into, or a lot of, we say brother, he would be a half brother, I guess. One of Vasudeva's sons with another wife. Yeah, it's a big family. We'll get into talking about Krishna living with his family and stuff and later parts. It's a big clan, the whole extended family, who all have different interrelations and such. A lot of them don't become major characters in the Bhagavatam, but yeah, he has a bunch of relatives.
Did Devaki have more than 8 sons?
I don't think she had any more children. No.
I see. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, that's a lot already, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even for Ara Yuga.
But Vasudeva has children with other wives.
I see.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a big extended you know, it's like most families were huge in this society.
Yeah.
Like everybody has like tons of and tons of children, tons of cousins, like a household. It's still like this in traditional Indian villages. Like, you know, people will go back from the United States where you're used to a family being maybe, you know, 4 to 10 people, and you'll go back to your home village and your family comes to greet you and it's like 3,000 people.
What?
Well, like seriously, I know people who have had this, you know, all the extended cousins and second cousins and people who consider you like their family, and you can live in their house if you want. Like that's how it is in a lot of the world still. Yeah, the United States is kind of unusual in having tiny and very separated families. But yeah, so there's always tons of relatives.
Amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, man. Thank you so much, David.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Haribol.
Haribol.